topic of discussion tonight is Hungary and the pressure it is facing from the European Union over reforms. Joining me now to discuss some of the possible issues and remedies is a research coordinator at Democracy Reporting International, Jakub Jaraczewski. Hello, good evening, Jakub. Thanks for joining us tonight on TVP World.
Good evening, and thank you for inviting me.
Yes, now 20 of the European Union's 27 member states have issued a joint declaration accusing Hungary of violating the bloc's fundamental values by passing laws targeting the LGBTQ and especially these pride marches, as we've seen. Now, will Budapest, in your opinion, give in to the EU demands, or is there a longer fight still ahead of us?
So I think that there is a clear pattern which we have seen over the last 5 years, which has played out with regards to European Union's reaction towards various dangerous activities of the Orban government. And it is that rhetoric, resolutions and calls do not work. The only limited instances of success in enforcement of EU values toward Hungary have been, similarly to the previous Polish government, when financial pressure has been applied. So those statements by 20 EU member states and the soft measures, I do not expect them to have any effect. It seems to me like Viktor Orban is becoming increasingly anxious and is reaching for increasingly drastic measures, apart from the topic of the LGBT marches ban. We have also the question of the new law on organizations. And so it is clear that we are indeed in for a longer struggle for the EU values in Hungary.
Should we point to some significance here that 20 of the European Union's 27 member states issued this joint declaration, and especially in the context of Article 7, because to get that whole process going, they need 4/5 majority, and that's pretty close.
I would say ultimately when it comes to Article 7, the situation is rather clear. The biggest threat of that article, the biggest sanction that can be employed is the potential removal of a member state's voting rights in the Council. This is indeed a very significant measure. However, unfortunately, that measure requires unanimous agreement among all the other EU member states, except, of course, for the country concerned. And that is very unlikely to happen because Viktor Orban has an ally in the Council, the Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico, who has repeatedly stated that he is going to block any strong measures against Hungary. So even if a significant majority of the EU member states will be on board with sanctioning Viktor Orban, he is still for now safe unless, of course, that majority and the EU institutions would be able in some way to convince Prime Minister Fico, the Slovak government, to change their mind.
Well, that's a great point. And Robert Fico has many issues, domestic issues on his docket, if you will. Is there something that the Europeans could do to entice Robert Fico not to back Viktor Orban?
So, historically, the financial pressure worked very well. However, the financial pressure that has worked insofar has been directly connected to various instruments that the EU was using to bolster the economies of member states. The biggest success of the European Commission in enforcement, which has been having both Hungary and Poland claw back from some of their most problematic reforms earlier, has been in connection to the use of the so-called recovery fund and to the use of the rule of law conditionality mechanism which has been used towards Hungary. Unfortunately, I don't see much wiggle room in case of Slovakia. The country is a beneficiary of the recovery fund, but not to as big a degree as some of the other EU member states, such as Poland. And while so far, the European Commission has been reluctant to act strongly towards Fico and the Slovak government. Of course, that may change. However, I don't see many tools on the table among official, let's say, channels that could have been used to convince the Slovak government to change their mind. Of course, diplomacy is always an option, and perhaps there can be some horse trading and informal deals to convince the Slovak government. But we must remember that Fico acts this way because he is likely certain that in case of the European Union moving against him, then Viktor Orban would have his back. And so the two gentlemen who have embraced an anti-democratic path are reinforcing each other and covering.
Now, concerning other holdouts, I mean, are there any other countries that wouldn't be on board in the event that they were able to garner the 4/5 majority and move forward with Article 7? It's been 7 years, by the way. I'm sure you're well aware.
Yes, it's been a very long story, and unfortunately, I see that there might be. It's hard to say at this point, but I think that some of the member states with conservative and right-wing governments might be. While not friendly to Viktor Orban and to his initiatives, they might be reluctant for the European Union to reach for the strongest measures. From what I've seen, Italy has not signed on the letter protesting against the measure to ban the LGBT pride marches in Hungary, and I so believe that Prime Minister Meloni might be friendly overtly towards Viktor Orban. She might be reluctant to push harder against him. Ultimately, it's all politics, and unfortunately, a friendly voice in the European Council supporting your initiative is worth a lot. So sometimes the political calculus lands on the situation where a member state might be reluctant to criticize their potential future ally who might come to their help in other matters.
Now, concerning those pride marches, which are set to take place in about a month, what are the plans for this thus far? Because we've seen some of these draconian measures introduced, to be introduced using facial recognition and financial penalties for those who organize such a march. What is your outlook? Will this take place? Is the law going to be in place in time for this march to happen? What are your thoughts?
I think that the LGBT community and their allies in Hungary are courageous people, and they will not back down. Those demonstrations and marches will be organized anyway. And I think that despite the pressure, they will be also joined by their friends from abroad. I'm very curious to see whether officials of the European Union's institutions will join them. There has been a call from the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen to refrain from joining and directly supporting the march out of not wanting to escalate the situation with the Hungarian government. But I'm pretty sure that there will be quite a lot of people coming from abroad to help their friends in Hungary. The use of facial recognition is an extremely worrying development. This is not only a breach of freedom to assembly, as it is a clear move to intimidate people away from taking part in the march, but we're also talking about the right to privacy. I don't think that the Hungarian government can be trusted with properly handling this data and ensuring proper oversight of courts over the use of facial recognition. Now, this is very worrying, I think, because regardless of whether some government is friendly to Viktor Orban or not, they might be inspired by these measures and inspired by a widespread use of facial recognition to track people who participate in protests. We have seen extremely worrying uses of this technology earlier, for example, in Hong Kong. And this situation may encourage other governments also to seek for this tool in the other context. So, however, I believe that tolerance will prevail and that the Hungarians will march together to show their solidarity with sexual minorities and that they are not afraid of the government clamping down on them.
Now, there's also been talk that Hungary will veto the extension of sanctions on Moscow. This could potentially free up the 300 billion or so euro that has been frozen since the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine back in 2022. How does the EU plan to Orban-proof these Russian sanctions?
I trust that the European Union member states and the European Commission will be able ultimately to dissuade Hungary from vetoing the sanctions package as they have done before. Insofar, we have seen several attempts by Viktor Orban to embark on some form of brinkmanship and to try to hold up those sanctions, which ultimately led to him folding and the sanctions package is being adopted. We don't know what has been agreed behind the scenes and what kind of concessions have been made or perhaps what kind of pressure have been used. But I believe that with all the other EU member states pretty much on board when it comes to sanctioning Russia, and Slovakia, while not being totally supportive of the idea, also likely not willing to escalate and to paint themselves as the country which is holding things up, I think that once again diplomacy will prevail and we will see the sanctions package adopted. However, of course, there is a question of how far this kind of situation can go and whether things won't escalate in the run-up to the next year's parliamentary elections in Hungary, when Viktor Orban, who very much feels the heat of the opposition party TISA breathing down on his neck, might become even more willing to use extreme measures towards boosting his political position.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe it'll come down to another ad hoc coffee break. Jakub Jaraczewski, research coordinator at Democracy Reporting International. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
And that's all the time we have on this edition of World News Tonight. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for watching. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you next time. Good night.